incorporate folklore into her story?
I think this kind of goes back to when we were talking about the first book, how like folklore, everyone kind of knows it, and it kind of sets like the theme and the tone for the entire book.
Did you guys do? Did you guys read the pre-reading thing?
Yeah, some of it.
It was kind of long, but in the pre-reading, it kind of talks about how that's one of the things that she read a lot of, was like folklore. She was into myth. She was into all different kinds of things. But I thought it was pretty interesting how it was saying, like it was a quote from her that said, "In a way, this early reading gave me great anguish throughout my childhood and adolescence, because my soul was with the gods and my body in the village." And she says, "People just would not act like gods. Stew beef, fried fat back, and morning grits were no ambrosia for Valhalla. Raking backyards and carrying out chamber pots were not the tasks of Thor." And so I thought, like in her use of folklore here, she's kind of talking about her own culture too, and like some of the things that maybe, you know, like she doesn't like or she does like. And you know, I see a whole ton of themes just from knowing what Hurston's background is based off of the pre-reading that she gave us, you know. So I can see why she would, like, she really preferred, she loved folklore.
Right.
Yeah, in the I can't remember if this was in that pre-reading, but after World War II, I think World War II. Oh my goodness, I'm like having, my brain is freezing up. But after a war, when there was like a really bad depression, whenever Franklin D. Roosevelt made that, I can't even remember what it's called now, you guys. Oh, sorry, I don't know what's wrong with me, but he made a bunch of agencies to give people jobs in the United States because there was a lot of people without jobs. So he put a bunch of government funding into all these different types of agencies. And one of the agencies went around and collected folklore. So they would just go and visit with all these different people and find out about the stories that they told with each other and the traditions that they had, the kinds of crafts that they made and stuff like that. And Zora Neale Hurston was in one of those agencies. So she did that as part of her job for a while. And they collected a lot of folklore, especially in the South, like in Appalachia, and then also with African Americans, especially people that had been slaves in the South, and collecting like their stories and songs and stuff. So that, yeah, that's her background coming to this, is that she did that as a job, and that helped her to learn about her culture, and also to appreciate it more too. So, yeah.
Anybody else got anything to add to that?
Hi, what are you doing?
Sorry if I cut you guys out. I caught like every fifth word of what people were saying.
Okay, go ahead, Tyrell. You can go to the next one.
Sorry.
All right. Sweet.
Sorry, I didn't.
How does African American tradition function in Their Eyes Were Watching God?
That question like regarding like the time and the setting and the racial conflict a little bit?
I think so. I think it's kind of cool how, well, not cool, but they had those, they had like thinking about the time and the place of when it was written. And I was just thinking, those seem to be some of the issues that they still face now, you know, with feminism and racism, you know, sometimes you hear even within the Black culture some of the things that are happening, and it's still happening, you know.
Sorry guys, my Wi-Fi has been playing up. So what's the function of the African American traditions in the book? I mean, like, I don't know a whole lot about American history, going to African American stuff, but there's a lot of references to slavery, and I guess a lot of things that might have been deemed normal back then. You know, like treating African American citizens as second class. You know, just near the period of the Civil War. To my understanding, that a lot of that slavery had to do with a lot of that, with that war. You know, the whole North versus South thing, and I feel like a lot of those traditions are shown in different ways through, you know, like language and a lot of the lack of proper English, I guess.
Was it hard for any of you guys to understand because not growing up around it?
Yeah. I mean, like, there are the things that we've seen on TV and movies and stuff, but like I just struggled with it a little bit.
I had to like reread pages over and over
Mm-hmm.
to like understand what I was reading a lot.
I liked how she changed not the perspective, the narrative, depending on whether the writer was talking or the characters, because it shows like the difference in their dialogue and just like the different education that they have. Because at the time, weren't the Blacks kind of repressed of like quality education? Does that sound right?
I think so.
Like the difference in
Makes
how
sense that they would have been
expressed that, how she narrated the book.
Yeah. Why do you think she used that kind of language instead of just writing it in standard English? Why do you think she used that kind of dialect?
Mm-hmm.
Gives it kind of like an authentic feel, and it allows you to put yourself into how things were back then, and like the language that they used, and just like that, I don't know, like South accent, I would say, and culture. It's just, for me anyways, it was more authentic that way.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people at that time, especially, were kind of ashamed of maybe the dialect that was used. But so some people who wrote books about that time period, they didn't use that kind of language. They would just write it in standard English. So I don't know. I think it says something about the way that she feels about her culture, that being authentic is maybe okay, you know?
Yeah. I feel like also it allows us to kind of get in someone else's shoes. I mean, for those people who speak another language, for instance, I learned Italian for my mission. I felt like I was in a different person's shoes because I was speaking a different language, but also changing the dialect according to every region that I went to. And it sort of, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say it made me a different person, but it at least gave me a perspective into the like a person's attitude and culture, I guess.
Yeah, the way we use language, it shapes the way that we view the world. You know, in certain cultures, we have different words, even in the same language. Like in different parts of the United States, we use different words. Did you guys find any words in there that were like kind of slang words that you remember just off the top of your head in the book that we don't use?
Well, even just the term nigger, you know, it's like super offensive, or the meaning of it, where back there it was like their reference to themselves. Well, and just knowing from a lot of people that are here that are African American, like almost to talk down, they sort of use that dialect. Like if you talk to them, like sometimes they joke around about it, but at the same time they use it as a way to say, they use it as a reference to talking down to somebody, or when somebody talks down to them, they'll start talking in that kind of a dialect, you know?
For sure, yeah.
I also wonder if she used that language sort of because she's talking about, or I feel like she's trying to give herself a voice or give her people a voice. And when you talk about people not using that because almost they're ashamed of it, it's her way of giving her people a voice. They did communicate. They did have this. She uses like, because I put in my summary, I was like, I wonder if there's some significance to sitting on a porch. And then she says about how for grandma, that was the grandma's dream. But then on the porch is only the men. And so culturally, it's like there has to be some kind of significance in there too, you know? So those are just some of the things that I noticed.
Yeah, and publishing that language in a book, that gives it validity, you know? And when something is published in a book, especially this book has been here for, you know, decades, and it's won awards and stuff like that, that gives that voice to the people because it gives it validity. I think you're right.
Sweet. Is that all for that one? Should we move on?
Mm-hmm.
All right. What do you think are the audience and purpose of the eyes for watching God?
Let's see.
I mean, I'm not sure if it has a. I mean, I could be wrong. Probably am. I'm not sure if it has a intended group as its target. However, given that it was, you know, written quite a while ago, and the fact that a lot of these race issues are still relevant today, I feel like it's kind of a broad subject to kind of for everyone.
When I was reading about it, did you see how it like kind of disappeared off the face of the earth for a little while, and then it talked about how it came back because now the way that people read it is different, or how they analyze it is different. So I'm wondering if that says volumes about the types of audiences that have access to it now, because it wasn't published or something like that. So I wonder, for purposes now, we can look back at it, but back then it didn't have a voice because it was a women author. I don't know, you know?
I was looking at a few different notes here and there about it and did a little bit of research about it as far as the themes and the expectations of what she wanted her audience to understand. And it was interesting because the notes that I read and the resources that I were looking at, they talked about how she wanted to, it's in my notes. She wanted to project the difference in genders and how they express love and how they go about it, as well as like the male and female roles in a relationship, and then how it's like for the main character, it was pretty suppressive as far as her role in general in being in a relationship, and that she found essentially like freedom after Tea Cake died, and just like the male and female role in a relationship is kind of the summary and how they go about love. But I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if the porch thing has something to do with gender, you know, because the men were usually on the porch because they didn't, after they like were done working, they could sit on the porch, but the women were still working, you know, a lot of times. I don't know for sure, but I wonder if that gender issues are tied to that. Yeah, but audience and purpose, I think you're right. There could have been maybe when she was writing, she wanted to write to all different kinds of people, but maybe only certain people had access to it. Because like you were talking about, education was only limited to certain kinds of people. And maybe now that more people have access to it, it can go to that wider audience that she was hoping to reach. So yeah, you guys are right on, I think. I don't think there's any one right answer, but I think you guys are on it.
All right. Next one. What societal attitudes, values, or ideals are conveyed and challenged in this book?
I think we mentioned a few, right?
Yeah,
Gender, race.
Kind of education.
Mm-hmm. Well, even looking at Love and Marriage, Lily, like what you were saying, about her purpose back then, and it's like you kind of see now in our day, they look back at that time where it was like the role of the woman is to stay in the home, to have children, to have dinner ready, to, you know what I mean? It's like the gender role as well, like the role of women and men. And now we talk about feminism and like it just, that's kind of what it reminds me of. Like it's changing. The roles are changing now. And so we can look at it from different eyes because now people have already fought against those kinds of societal attitudes. And I was thinking, man, it must have been even worse if you were a Black woman in society back then, because then it's like first there's the white man, then the white female, right? And then there's the Black male, and then the Black female, and it was even worse for her back then. So I kind of think that might be something that it's talking about too, or for us as we're looking at it now, about how our roles are all changing, you know, but the fight feels still the same, you know?
Yeah. Do you think it's changed that much now? I mean, have you guys heard of intersectionality? That topic, intersectionality. So that means like, or maybe what's another word they say? I don't know, but it means like what you were talking about. Like it's hard for women in society, but then if you add some kind of cultural minority, and then if you add a class issue to that, like all of those different social indicators can just pile on top of each other to make it so that it's even harder to make yourself, you know, have equal rights in society. And I don't know if it's changed that much. I mean, what do you guys think? I think that there's definitely most of the time, well, besides the last 2 years, there's a lot less like explicit racism in the world, you know. It's definitely come up more lately, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think it's harder to have like all these different, I don't know. Do you think it's changed that much since she wrote the book? That being a woman and then being a woman who's poor, or being a woman who's not educated, or being a woman who's African American, do you think that still affects people more than if they're just, you know, I don't know, have one thing that's not the status quo, or like the majority, I guess?
I think the problems still exist. I think our society's attitudes, or this is really generalized, but I think our society's attitudes are pushing to change our perspective on the issues. That makes sense. So the problems are.
I feel like we've made advancements in some areas. You know, there's definitely the mindset to push forward. If I feel like now what it needs is just people to carry it out. I guess carry out those the equality things. They're not sort of not necessarily ignoring racism, but just deciding not to be racist. You know, or deciding not to be sexist, because like, and a lot of the times we do those things without actually thinking about them, without a conscious effort to be racist or to be sexist. You know, those things do come up.
In my work that I do now, we talk a lot about that, because our job, or our role in my job, is we find all of those different like factors, we call them risk factors, because the more you have, the more it plays a part in a child's upbringing. And so they've done a study recently here in Utah, and they started off the study in Hawaii, because we call Hawaii the melting pot, of course. And then the studies have shown that within the next few years, and with the way that everybody is immigrating and the way that things are going now, that pretty soon there's not going to be any minorities. And so they're trying to prepare for that. Like, if there's not any minorities, how is that going to affect our economy? How is that going to affect all of us? And so I think it's I think that it still exists. And I think that there still are risk factors, but I think we are pushing towards getting rid of some of those. Like, we're in a good time to be able to do that, you know? So whenever we talk about race and talk about stuff like that, it's really cool to see how the world is changing and how it's affecting everybody.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right, we'll get the next question. In what ways does Hurston make African American tradition relevant for contemporary readers? I mean, a lot of the stuff that you can sort of relate it. I mean, one thing I like to do when I read is to just relate it to myself, and just, you know, how does this relate to me? What do I need to learn, sort of things. You know, I think back to New Zealand in about the 90s. So it was illegal to speak Maori, the native language of New Zealand, in New Zealand. It was illegal to speak out in public and to teach it in schools until about 1986. And that just shows me that, like, oppression exists in pretty much any place in the world. You know, there's always some form of oppression, whether it comes in the form of, you know, taking away a culture's language, or taking away a culture's education, taking away someone's, you know, title, I guess. I mean, just sort of guessing that a lot of these African American slaves at this time, they must have come from families where perhaps they come from a chiefly line. You know, perhaps perhaps their family is quite prestigious back where they were from in Africa. Perhaps a lot of these things were taken away from them, but, like, more so opportunities and stuff that were taken away from them, not necessarily factors and things. And I feel like that is able to be shown not only in African American history, but also throughout many other cultures, countries, and things. Put that down.
Sort of wonder if she was hoping that the world might change a little in the future for her readers, you know? Like, I wonder if she ever thought about that. Like, I wonder what she would think if she knew that we still are facing some of those, you know?
Yeah. And I think she kind of wanted us to see what it was like for them back in the day. You know, like, for us readers now, to be able to read this book and be like, wow, this is what they went through, or this is how it was back then. I think that, for me anyway, that was one of the things that when I was reading it, I was thinking.
She wrote an essay called "How It Feels to Be Colored Me," and it's really interesting. I think she definitely was trying to help people understand what it was like for them. We'll post that announcement because it's a short essay and kind of fun to read. But, yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Nope. Next one.
All right. How does race affect the relationships of characters in the novel? Gender, class. Give specific examples, including page numbers.
Can you read that again?
How does race affect the relationships of characters in the novel? Gender and class. Give specific examples, including page numbers.
Well, I feel like with what's her name? Jane.
Jamie.
Yeah. Well, for her, anyways, because like it mentioned a lot with her hair. You know, her hair, and being that she was part white, I guess. The other ladies looked at her in a negative way because she wasn't like them, you know. So they viewed her negatively. So I think they didn't see her as one of them. And if they did, they were jealous of her because of the features that she had. They constantly talked about her beauty and stuff. So I think that kind of plays a part of it, like the race. Sorry.
I mean,
well, when you talk about a class within a class, you know, when they were working on the muck, and then there was Mrs. Turner who would talk about how she talked about their different classes. So it's one of the ways, like, it's just an example of how do you find out about these class within, you know, or even when they go to have to bury the people after the hurricane, and they're talking about what is it, a casket for the whites, and then everybody else gets buried in the hole, you know. So just examples of how race played a part in how they were treated, I guess.
What do you think about her relationship with Joe and like class? How did that play out? Like differences in class when she married Joe and they moved and stuff like that.
I think she definitely felt like she was a trophy wife to Joe. And I mean, maybe that was to help him advance in his political career. The fact that he has this trophy wife over here. I mean, I just feel like he was pretty much using her. I guess. I mean, for who she was.
I think it was interesting, like the contrast between him and TK, because the contrast I think is like dominant, but also a very relationship and like do this, say this versus let's just go have fun and kind of live.
Have you guys ever heard of a town that was all Black people? I wonder if that really existed, because it talked about how some of her writing she tended to incorporate a lot of real life stuff. I didn't really look into any background to see if something like that really existed, But
Sorry, I did a little bit of research, and I know her family moved to Florida to a small town, and it like majority was a Black community, if I'm right. Does that sound right?
mm-hmm.
Yeah, she talks about that in her essay, how it feels to be colored me, and it was like the white people would walk. It was near a tourist community, or it was a tourist community, I can't remember, but they would go through her community and they'd kind of like watch people on their front porch, watch the African American people, and like it felt like they were in a zoo kind of, but she would dance for them and stuff like that. So I don't know, kind of interesting. I think there probably were some communities, and I mean, I think that there still are places in the United States that are a lot I mean, I've read about places, especially in the South, where the town is mostly African American, and I've just read about how the schools are not as good and they don't get funding and stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, would be interesting to do more research, but also probably kind of sad to do more research. I don't know.
Sweet. All right, go to the last question. When do two or more of the above factors come together to influence the way a character is treated or interacts with the world? Again, give specific examples. So that's talking about race, gender, and class.
I think you guys talked about that already.
No.
But if you have any other examples, it's cool.
I mean, the fact that Janie becomes like financially independent, I guess through Joe's estate, that challenges the role of men are supposed to be the breadwinners, but we got this woman here who's able to hold her own, pay for her own things and things, and the fact that she's African American. She's an African American woman. It's African American and a woman, and there she is, able to support herself financially. And so that sort of challenges everything that I guess might have been happening at the time.
How much do you think that helped her? Like, do you feel like after that, I don't know. I mean, the idea of that is like, wow, that would mean freedom, having that money, then she'd be free. But I don't know. Do you feel like she felt like that gave her freedom, the freedom that she wanted?
Somewhat, but again, like I feel like what she was really after was shown in her description of the pear tree. Like what she really, really wanted was a good relationship. And so while it may have helped her somehow, it wasn't necessarily what she wanted. I don't know, that's just my view, but
if you guys could like sum up a message, I mean, I guess you're going to, when you do the analysis, I think the next assignment is an analysis paper, but what would you say is a message that Thurston wants us to get out of this book?
Kind of like self-development in a way, because I feel like every relationship and past that, she's building herself, and obviously at the end, like, she comes into the inheritance and not so much as gains freedom, but has more freedom to become more not self-aware, but more self-like building. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. So what do you think her message is about self-development? I think you're right. That's definitely a theme. So this is what when you're trying to make a thesis statement, this is what I want you to ask. Like, okay, it's about self-development because I see self-development in the character and her pursuit of self-development. So what's the message she's trying to send about self-development?
I think just not listening to what other people say or want for you, but digging deep within yourself and finding out what you truly want and going after those things.
Mm-hmm. So that's the way to like true success? That going after what you feel is best? What do you think?
I think so, because I put under here, or she says at the very end, the quote from her, two things that everybody's got to do for themselves. They have to know God and they have to find out about living for themselves. So that's kind of, for me, that's like her, okay, now I'm saying goodbye. I'm signing off.
Yeah.
Over and out.
I think once you start living for yourself instead of living for others, that's when you like, okay, I'm there. You know, you reach the pivotal point in your life when you're truly living for yourself and not for others.
Because she says, you know, like, I think a turning point or the climax is when she says, I'm not going to do what my grandma said I need to do, you know? I'm not going to live how my grandma wanted. And she says that to Phoebe. Like, that's when she learns, I got to live for myself. And I was trying to, there was only the one line about their eyes were watching God. She made some biblical references, but I was trying to kind of understand that too. Because in the end, one of the things she says, they got to go to God. So I was like, I kind of was confused by it. There's not a lot of references to God, or is there? And I just missed them.
What do you guys think? Yeah, it's the title, so there's got to be some message in there about God.
Because really, it was like the hurricane, right? And then they were saying their eyes were watching. Their eyes were staring into the blackness or something, but their eyes were watching God. But that's the only. And then there's here and there some biblical references, but other than that, I was like, huh. Did she mention it more?
Kind of talked a lot about like the horizon.
Oh yeah.
You know, so I don't know. I'm still kind of trying to put everything together. So I don't know if that maybe could be part of it, because it brings up the horizon a lot, and I don't know.
Totally. Yeah, that could be symbolism. What else could the horizon symbolize?
Doesn't the horizon usually symbolize, isn't it usually like an archetype for like new beginnings?
Yeah, and that could relate to God too. I mean, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
When they looked into the blackness in the hurricane, they saw God, but you could also look at it as a new beginning, depending on where she was in the story, maybe. I think that would be really cool to explore for a paper, why it's called Their Eyes Were Watching God. And she doesn't mention it a lot, but I think that you could find an implied message in there somewhere. That would be really interesting to look for. Cool. Good job, you guys. Anything else? Do you guys have any questions about the class? I know we probably used all of our whole time, but I really appreciate that you guys are working so well together in your group. You guys are doing a really good job. And you're bringing up points that are really useful. And I hope that you're finding it useful as you prepare for your papers and stuff. We haven't really written a lot of papers yet, but the next 2 books we'll be writing papers about them. And these kind of are the hardest books. So the next one's really, really good too. But do you guys have any questions or suggestions about the class or anything like that?
Nothing for me.
No,
Thank
we're
you.
good. And like we know that we can just email if we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, I'll let you guys go finish if you want, but nice job. Thanks for letting me join.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye, everybody. Tyrell,
Bye.
you got the paper, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I got it.
Okay,
I'll
bye,
submit
guys.
that
Have a good
tonight.
evening, guys.
Thanks.